are at the Paris Motorshow. It's the first time I've been personally to a show here for some years, and of course it's many years since anyone's been to a show here. So first impressions, there's a lot more exhibitors, smaller exhibitors, less space for actual metal. There's no carpet, which is an unusual sight to see at one of these prestigious shows. Some of the exhibitors are interesting. So we've got exhibitors like Netflix, people who are trying to help the car industry transition to a new state, to a new digital state, which is about electrification, but also about a new customer experience that's less about ownership and more about convenience, more about mobility. So we're going to have a look around and see what we find and try to understand the direction of travel for the industry. So we thought we'd stop here on the way past because we're wondering whether this is actually the Ford stand. It's hard to imagine this would be it. One car on a small bit of plastic with a huge logo, but possibly it is, and we don't want to miss it. And of course it's the Mach-E, which Ford is currently not selling in all markets. Looking pretty good, but a little bit lonely. So here we are in kind of the heart of the show, if you like. One of the big brands, the French brands, Peugeot, mainstream stand. It's not the biggest stand, it looks great. We've got the Le Mans car for next year, which personally I'm very excited by. And they're showing the new Peugeot 408, which is kind of loosely described as the car for people who are getting tired of SUVs. So a bit more rakish, looks pretty good. Next door you've got DS. Interestingly, some of the coverage that I've read is talking more about the way that cars are branding themselves and how they're positioning themselves and how it's all going to fit in than actually the vehicles per se, which says, I think, something about the uncertainty, the uncertain times that the industry finds itself in. Journalists are kind of more interested in corporate structures and viability than the products they're producing. The other factor, of course, is there aren't that many products to talk about, and they're largely evolutionary. But looking forward to seeing Renault later, who are at least doing something a bit different and have that amazing word that we all get excited by, the concept car. So one of the striking things about the show so far is the sort of mainstream feel to it. It's all about cars that are for families, you know. They're exciting because they're new, but they're not pushing the boundaries. So right opposite Stellantis, right opposite Peugeot, you've got this new brand, certainly new to me, Hopium, and what they're doing is making a big statement with a stand that's not a lot smaller than the mainstream brands around it. There's a car under a sheet, as you can see, some very clean graphics, looks a bit Polestar-like, but no one's ever heard of it, so they're all walking past it thinking, is this significant or not? I certainly haven't seen it in any of the previews. Okay, so one of the interesting things is you walk into the main hall, you walk past Peugeot and DS, and then you see this brand, another brand that you won't have heard of, Cosmobilis, and it turns out it's part of the BYD empire. So just as Geely has Lynk & Co, Cosmobilis seems to be BYD's mobility solution. It includes a car, a BYD, but it's a sort of subscription package model as far as we can tell. Visually very different from BYD, who have got a huge stand, quite a great looking stand. They've got their technology on show, they've got electric motors to showcase their technical capability, but also the sort of traditional, in inverted commas, old school Motorshow stand with offices where you can meet, where you can do business, both for journalists and B2B industry people. So they're investing heavily in a statement, and you know, it's pretty convincing, and money is being spent for sure. So first show highlight is this LED screen on the BYD stand that feels sort of 3D immersive graphics. It's very cool indeed to showcase this new model, the Han. Feels very futuristic, expensive. I guess they're kind of taking traditional Western cues of the future, space, black holes, and presenting it as a Eastern brand phenomenon, and it's working. It's going to make choosing a car very difficult because everything looks the same and does the same thing. So it's going to be down to other factors. The digital experience be crucial, both in the build up to the purchase and post-purchase, but also the convenience, the cost, how does it fit into my life? Here's an example of one of the up-and-coming brands. We're seeing them rise up the league tables in digital in various different ways. It's MG. This is a very nice looking car. Lots of features which you can immediately see are competitive, on a par in some ways with some of the Polestars that are so popular in the market. One of the interesting things about this exhibit is it's on the stand of a bank. Yeah, so back in the old days, banks would exhibit at car shows, but they would normally borrow a car from another exhibitor. But here it seems they've got their own cars, and in fact they've got a multiple choice of cars, including a new Fisker, it seems, the Fisker Ocean, which is a really good looking car. And in fact, there is Henrik Fisker himself about to be interviewed. That's a significant car which people are going to be writing a lot about, and I think it looks pretty good. So this sign outside Hall 3 is quite interesting, and it tells you a bit about the show. So you've got a lot of brands there, they're all given the same weight. But as you can see, there's a mixture of car brands and brands you've never heard of, and Lego and Netflix. And also these headings, Mobility Professionnelle Électrique et Hydrogène. So basically they're saying this is a B2B show as well as a B2C. And the brands kind of reflect that. So here we are going into Hall 6. It's already looking a bit busier than the previous Hall 4, and that's probably because of Renault and Dacia, two of the brands who are taking this show pretty seriously with concept cars. And yeah, this actually feels like the shows from the old days. You can feel the heat from the lights, the stuff going on, lots of journalists, at least I assume they're journalists, and news to report. And immediately you see that Dacia brand, it just looks so cool. It looks like a brand you'd see in a pair of sneakers, a pair of training shoes. And that really is a brand that's going places. They've got the model right, chunky, good looks, rugged. Electrification coming in, it's low cost thanks to Chinese platforms. And yeah, that really does feel like a brand of the future compared with some of the others we've already seen, which, yeah, they're doing okay, but they don't look like they're going anywhere. So Renault, yeah, this is buzzing. This really feels like a centre of activity. And there's the Renault 4, which is one of my personal highlights of the show when I was working out what to do when I got here. And that's because the Renault 4, the original Renault 4, was a very significant car, you know, alongside Beetle, 2CV, Mini. The Renault 4 really was a game changer in Europe and other bits of the world. So they've reinvented it. I mean, it's not the Renault 4 that I remember, but it looks pretty cool. In fact, it would look at home at Dacia across the corridor, which probably says something about Dacia's rise to fame and fortune. And then there's this Renault 5 Turbo concept, which is electric, and frankly looks like the old Renault 5, even with the collapsed suspension that Renault 5s often would suffer from. And it looks pretty outrageous. I'm not sure whether I'd want to drive it too fast. It looked like it could swap ends rather easily. And here's the Renault 5 concept car. This is familiar, it's been around for a year or two. It's kind of their Zoe replacement for 2025, or maybe a little bit before that. And that really looks great. I mean, that's a kind of resto mod in flavour, but bang up to date, electric. And yeah, that's got my name on it. So here we are on the Dacia stand, very colour coordinated. These cars look very attractive, they're good value, they look great, there's a real boldness to the new branding which is very effective. And I think the way they've done the stand with this kind of rugged, get out there, live your life, have fun. Lots of brands try and do that, but I'd say here it's actually working, it's pretty successful. And the stand is clearly designed for people to be shopping for the cars. The Renault stand is more about showcasing concepts, getting people excited. This one is about walking around, actually seeing the car in the flesh, thinking about buying one, which I think is very much reflects Dacia's current performance in the market, where it's in demand and working. Here we are on the Alpine stand. Alpine is a brand that's owned by Renault. Its reason for existing is to be a halo brand for the Renault Group, to talk about future, about performance. They've got a low weight, high power version of the A110 on the stand here, which is one of the world's most acclaimed supercars, albeit one that isn't bought in huge numbers. This is a concept car that is electric based. It's typically what a manufacturer does when they don't want to go to the expense of producing something real. They produce a great looking concept, and it does look pretty great. But it does demonstrate Renault's commitment to the brand. It's in Formula One. They want to have something at the top end to push them in a premium direction. Okay, so we're on the stand of a brand called VinFast, which is a Vietnamese car brand, not something you hear said very often. They are using the formula of Chinese-made components with an attractive body. One of the things that we've noticed about VinFast is they're taking digital very seriously, working with a company we know well, Zero Light, to bring this car to life in the buying process. Like BYD, they've invested in the stand, and it looks like a place where people will do business. This is where investment is centred, brands that have interesting local markets but an ambition to get into Europe and beyond, with cars that do look pretty good. I mean, there's something rather conventional and chunky about them, but they're electric and they're nicely finished. This is the GWM stand, the Great Wall Motor stand. Think of them like Stellantis in Europe, one of these sort of umbrella brands with various sub-brands underneath. For example, Aura, or way. And the first thing I'm thinking when I'm looking at these cars is I'm getting a bit exhausted about the number of different cars which I have never heard of before, which look pretty similar, with maybe the exception of the Funky Cat, which does look pretty different. I'm just wondering how they fit in and whether anyone's ever going to buy one in the West. It does show the opportunity of electric, where you can produce cars in great volumes, different types of car based on similar underpinnings, but it also speaks to the challenge of marketing them and achieving standout and differentiation, because frankly they are all starting to look very similar. So why would you choose one? And I think the way that companies use digital is going to be very interesting, because if they invest heavily in getting cut through, just being visible could be all it takes to sell a car like the Whey coffee, for example, alongside some of the more conventional brands that people are used to. Here we are on the Hopium stand, seeing the car that we were seeing under a sheet earlier. I'm not sure if Hopium is a take on something like Unobtainium, but they've got a very stripped out stand. There's no information, the car's there, but we're interested to find out a little bit more about the brand. So we've got a QR code here. Let's see what it's telling us so we can find out more about Hopium. So that isn't very digital after all.